The Hindu Kush Mountains had never felt more like a tomb. Sergeant Marcus Reed pressed his back against the jagged rock face, feeling the heat of Taliban bullets chipping away at his cover. Dust and stone fragments rained down on his helmet as another burst of automatic fire tore through the air inches from his head. 8 Rangers, pinned down in a valley that had turned from a routine patrol route into a killing ground in less than 3 minutes. "Contact right! Contact right!" Corporal Danny Chen screamed into his radio, returning fire in short, controlled bursts. His voice carried the edge of panic that came when trained soldiers realized they'd walked into a perfectly laid trap. Reed risked a glance over the boulder. His stomach dropped. At least 30 Taliban fighters occupied the high ground on 3 sides, their positions expertly chosen. The narrow valley floor offered zero cover for retreat, and the enemy had them bracketed with overlapping fields of fire. This wasn't a random ambush. This was calculated, professional, deadly. "Sergeant, we got casualties," Specialist Morrison called out, his hands pressed against Private Jackson's bleeding shoulder. "Jackson's hit bad. We need medevac now." Reed grabbed his radio handset, thumb jamming down on the transmit button. "Viper 6, this is Ranger 2-1, taking heavy fire, grid November Whiskey 742385. We have 1 urgent surgical, need immediate air support and extraction. How copy?" Static crackled for 3 agonizing seconds before the response came. "Ranger 2-1, Viper 6. Closest air support is 45 minutes out. Closest medevac is 1 hour. We're scrambling everything we have. Can you hold position?" 45 minutes. Reed looked at Jackson's pale face, at the blood seeping between Morrison's fingers despite the pressure dressing. He looked at his 7 other Rangers, good men with families waiting back home, pinned down by an enemy that had them dead to rights. "Negative, Viper 6. We won't last 15 minutes, we need." An explosion of rock and dust erupted from an enemy position 400 meters upslope. Reed's words died in his throat. A Taliban fighter pitched forward off the ridge, tumbling down the mountainside like a broken doll. Before the body stopped rolling, another enemy fighter jerked backward, a red mist briefly visible even at distance. "What the hell?" Chen breathed beside him, pressing himself against the rocks. 2 more shots cracked across the valley in rapid succession. 2 more Taliban fighters dropped, the second one mid-run, his body spinning from the impact before crashing into the rocks. The remaining enemy fighters began shouting in Pashto, their disciplined assault dissolving into confused crossfire as they searched for this new threat. Reed grabbed his binoculars with shaking hands, scanning the opposite ridgeline. Nothing. No muzzle flash, no movement, no indication of where these impossibly accurate shots were coming from. Another Taliban fighter fell, this one at least 600 meters from Reed's position, shot while hiding behind cover that should have protected him. Viper 6, who else is operating in our sector?" Reed demanded into the radio, watching another enemy position go silent. "We've got unknown friendly fire supporting our position." "Ranger 2-1, stand by." The radio went quiet for a moment, during which 3 more Taliban fighters were systematically eliminated by an unseen shooter. When the response came, the operations officer's voice carried a strange tone, something between relief and disbelief. "Ranger 2-1, local asset is in your area. Call sign Huntress, she's providing support." "She," Reed repeated, certain he'd misheard over the gunfire. "Affirmative 2-1, 19-year-old Afghan female, been working with us for 3 months. She's been tracking that Taliban cell for a week. Guess she decided to intervene." Reed's mind reeled. A 19-year-old girl was single-handedly dismantling a Taliban ambush that had his trained Rangers pinned down and bleeding. Impossible. He raised the binoculars again, desperately searching the ridgeline. Then he saw her. Just for a second, a slight figure shifted position among the rocks 700 meters away. She wore traditional Afghan clothing in earth tones that blended perfectly with the terrain. A rifle, looking almost too large for her small frame, rested with absolute steadiness against her shoulder. As Reed watched through his magnified optics, she adjusted her position with the fluid economy of movement that came only from extensive training or extensive experience. Another shot cracked out. Reed swung his binoculars to the impact point. A Taliban machine gun position that had been hammering his team went silent as the gunner slumped over his weapon. "Jesus Christ," whispered Specialist Thompson, who'd been watching through his own rifle scope. "Did you see that shot? That guy was behind a rock wall. She shot through a 6-inch gap at, what, 650 meters?" Chen had stopped firing, simply staring at the carnage unfolding in the enemy positions. "This is insane. That's not possible. No one shoots like that. Not even our snipers shoot like that." But the evidence was irrefutable. The Taliban ambush was collapsing. What had been an organized, deadly trap was now chaos. Enemy fighters were abandoning their positions, running for deeper cover, shouting at each other. Some were trying to locate the source of the devastating fire. Others were simply fleeing. Bodies littered the slopes. Reed counted at least 12 confirmed kills, each from a single shot, each at ranges that would challenge even the most experienced marksmen. The mysterious shooter, this huntress, shifted position again, moving with practiced stealth to a new firing point. Reed caught a brief glimpse of her face through his binoculars. Young, dust-covered, with dark eyes that held an intensity that made his skin crawl. She wasn't smiling, wasn't celebrating. Her expression was blank, mechanical, as if she were performing a tedious chore rather than engaging in deadly combat. She settled into her new position and resumed firing. Each shot was precise, deliberate, and utterly lethal. A Taliban commander trying to rally his men from behind a boulder, a spotter calling out positions from a crevice, a fighter attempting to flank around the valley wall. One after another they fell. "Sergeant Reed," Morrison called out. "Jackson's stable for now, but we need to move him." The suppressing fire on Reed's position had decreased dramatically. The Taliban fighters who remained alive were too busy trying to survive this phantom sniper to maintain their ambush. It was an opening, maybe their only one. "Viper 6, we're going to attempt movement to a better position," Reed transmitted. "Ask Huntress if she can cover our displacement." 2-1, Huntress says she's got you. Move on her signal." Reed waited, every muscle tensed. Then his radio crackled with a voice he didn't recognize, young, female, speaking accented but clear English. "American Rangers. When I fire 3 shots rapidly, you run northeast to the rock formation. 30 meters, I will cover. Understand?" The voice was calm, almost cold. No excitement, no fear, just professional detachment. Reed keyed his mic. "Understood, Huntress," standing by. 5 seconds passed. Then 3 shots rang out in rapid succession, crack, 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 each from a different target. Taliban fighters who'd been positioned to cut off the Rangers' northeastern route dropped simultaneously. "Move, move, move," Reed shouted. His Rangers didn't need to be told twice. They rose as one, Morrison and Thompson carrying Jackson between them, and sprinted across the open ground. Reed expected the shattering impact of enemy fire, but it never came. Instead, he heard that rifle continuing its deadly work, each shot precisely timed to eliminate any Taliban fighter who tried to draw a bead on the running Americans. They crashed into cover behind a larger rock formation, chests heaving, adrenaline flooding their systems. Reed immediately did a head count. All 8 Rangers accounted for, Jackson still alive. Through his binoculars, Reed watched the teenage sniper work. She was methodical, patient, choosing each target with careful deliberation. This wasn't spray and pray. This wasn't even the work of a talented amateur. This was a master craftsman at work, and the craft was death. The remaining Taliban fighters were in full retreat now, abandoning equipment and wounded as they fled deeper into the mountains. The girl, Huntress, fired one final shot, dropping a fighter who'd been attempting to retrieve a fallen machine gun, then went still. Reed's radio crackled. "Rangers, you are clear. Extraction helicopter comes soon. I will watch until then." "Huntress, this is Ranger 2-1 actual," Reed transmitted, his voice rough with emotion and shock. We need to meet you. Where are you?" A pause, then, "Grid November Whiskey 742512. I come to you 10 minutes. Chen stared at Reed, his young face pale beneath the dust and sweat. "Sarge, what the hell just happened? Who is this girl?" Reed shook his head slowly, looking at the scattered Taliban bodies on the mountain slopes, at his Rangers alive when they should have been dead, at the impossible shots that had saved them all. "I don't know, Chen," he said quietly, "but I think we just witnessed something that's going to change everything we thought we knew about this war." In the distance, a slight figure rose from the rocks and began making her way down the mountain toward them, moving like a ghost through terrain that would slow even the most experienced Rangers. And in that moment, Sergeant Marcus Reed understood that this 19-year-old Afghan girl had become something far beyond a mere soldier. She had become a legend, and their story together was only beginning. Amina Nazari had been tracking the Ranger patrol since dawn, moving through the mountains like a shadow, invisible to both friend and foe. She knew these peaks the way a mother knows her child's face, every ridge, every hidden path, every rock formation that could conceal a sniper or hide an ambush. This had been her home once, before the Taliban turned it into a graveyard. Through her scope, she'd watched the American patrol moving along the valley floor with the casual confidence of soldiers who believed their technology and training made them invincible. She'd seen this before. Good men, brave men, walking into death because they didn't understand these mountains, didn't respect the patience of an enemy who'd been fighting in these peaks for generations. The Taliban ambush had been obvious to her trained eyes. The slight disturbance of rocks indicating recent positioning, the unnatural stillness of shadows that should have contained grazing goats, the absence of bird calls in areas that should have been alive with sound. She'd spotted 32 fighters in total, positioned with the skill that came from years of guerrilla warfare. She could have radioed a warning to the American base. Instead, she'd moved into position and waited. Warnings were just words, easily ignored. Action spoke louder. Now, as she made her way down the mountainside toward the American Rangers, she ran through her familiar post-engagement routine. Ammunition check. 17 rounds remaining from her 60-round combat load. Weapon status. Rifle functioning perfectly, barrel still cool enough for sustained fire if needed. Physical condition. Minor dehydration. Elevated heart rate returning to normal, shoulder aching from the rifle's recoil after 43 shots in 18 minutes. 43 shots, 43 dead Taliban fighters. She felt nothing about the number. Feeling was a luxury she'd abandoned 6 months ago, the day she'd watched her village burn. Her spotter, old Bashir, materialized from the rocks beside her like smoke. He was 73 years old, bent from decades of mountain life, but his eyes were sharp, and his knowledge of the terrain was invaluable. He'd been her father's friend, one of the few survivors from her village, and he'd appointed himself her guardian and translator with the stubborn insistence of a man who'd already lost everything except his sense of duty. "The Americans will want to know who you are," Bashir said in Pashto, his voice raspy from years of smoking hand-rolled cigarettes. "What you are." "I am a weapon," Amina replied flatly, checking her rifle's chamber. "Nothing more." "You are a girl who has become a ghost," Bashir corrected gently. "Your mother would weep to see what this war has made you." Amina's jaw tightened, but she said nothing. Her mother was dead. Her father was dead. Her older brother Khalid was dead. Her 2 younger cousins were dead. Her entire village, 127 people, was dead or scattered to refugee camps across the border. Grief was another luxury she couldn't afford. They approached the American position cautiously, Bashir calling out in English to avoid being shot. "American Rangers, we are friendlies. Huntress is approaching. Amina saw them then. 8 men in dusty combat uniforms, weapons ready but not aimed, watching her descent with expressions that ranged from disbelief to awe to suspicion. She catalogued each face, each weapon, each position with the automatic assessment that had become second nature. The sergeant, the one who'd radioed her, was mid-30s, experienced eyes, weapon discipline excellent. The corporal beside him was younger, Asian features, still processing what he'd witnessed. Another specialist was treating a wounded man. Shoulder wound, stable, would survive. She reached the rock formation and stood before them, very aware of how she must appear. Small, barely 5'4" in her worn boots, thin from months of irregular meals and constant movement. Her grandmother's traditional Afghan dress was dusty and torn at the hem. Her headscarf had slipped back, revealing hair she'd chopped short with a knife because long hair was a liability in combat. Her hands were calloused and scarred, her fingernails broken and dirty. But it was her eyes that made the Rangers shift uncomfortably. She could see it in their reactions. They'd expected to find a girl, maybe a lucky amateur who'd gotten in a few good shots. Instead, they were looking into the eyes of someone who'd killed more men than most of them, someone who'd stopped feeling human somewhere along the way. The sergeant stepped forward, extending his hand. "Sergeant Marcus Reed, 75th Ranger Regiment, you saved our lives." Amina looked at his hand for a moment before shaking it. His grip was firm, respectful. She appreciated that, not too gentle, not trying to prove anything. "Amina Nazari," she said in English. Her brother Khalid had taught her, insisting that knowing the language of both allies and enemies was survival. "You were walking into an ambush. I prevented it." "Prevented it?" The young corporal laughed, the sound slightly hysterical. "Lady, you just killed more Taliban in 20 minutes than our whole company has in 3 months. Where the hell did you learn to shoot like that?" Amina's expression didn't change. "My brother taught me. He was Afghan National Police trained by Americans. He said women must be stronger than men because Taliban fear strong women most." She paused, her voice flattening further. "He died defending my school. Taliban burned it anyway. 23 teachers and students inside." The Americans fell silent. Reed's face tightened with understanding and something that might have been sympathy. Amina hated sympathy. It was useless, changed nothing. "How long have you been out here?" Reed asked quietly. "Alone." 6 months, 2 weeks, 4 days, Amina answered automatically. Time had lost meaning except as a measurement of survival. "Since my village was destroyed. Bashir," she gestured to the old man, "he helps sometimes. Brings food, ammunition, information. But mostly I work alone." Specialist Morrison, the medic, stood up from treating the wounded ranger. "You're just a kid. You can't be more than 19 years, 7 months, Amina interrupted. "And I stopped being a kid when I watched my father's body dragged through the streets by Taliban fighters who wanted to make an example. When I had to bury my mother and cousins in a mass grave because there were too many bodies for individual burials. When I spent 3 days hiding in a cellar listening to the screams of my neighbors being executed." Her voice never rose, never wavered. She recited the facts like a military after-action report, devoid of emotion. The Americans exchanged uncomfortable glances. Reed pulled out a map, changing the subject with the tact of an experienced leader. "We're on a mission to extract a downed pilot, Captain Sarah Vance. Her F-16 went down 8 miles northeast of here. Grid November Whiskey 764291. Intelligence says Taliban forces are converging on the crash site. We need to reach her before they do." Amina studied the map, her tactical mind automatically calculating routes and risks. "Your planned route," Reed traced a line along the valley floor, following what looked like the most direct path. Amina shook her head. "You will die. Taliban have checkpoints here, here, and here." She pointed to 3 locations along his route. "Also mines in this area from Russian war. Old but still active." "How do you know all this?" asked Corporal Chen, leaning in to look at the map. "Because I have been hunting Taliban for 6 months," Amina replied simply. I watch, I learn, I map their movements. They think these mountains belong to them. They are wrong. These mountains are my home. They just die here. She traced an alternative route with her finger, a winding path through higher elevations, utilizing ridge lines and hidden valleys that didn't appear on the American military maps. This way, longer distance but safer. I know every meter of this path. I can guide you. Reed studied her for a long moment. She could see him weighing options, calculating risks. Taking a 19-year-old local girl into combat went against every regulation and instinct, but she'd just proven her capabilities in the most definitive way possible. Your intel notebook, Reed said, gesturing to the worn book tucked into her vest. May I see it? Amina hesitated, then handed it over. The notebook was her most valuable possession, 6 months of painstaking intelligence gathering. Taliban patrol patterns, commander locations, supply routes, safe house positions, all meticulously documented in a mixture of Pashto, English, and her own coded shorthand. Reed flipped through the pages, his eyes widening. This is months of professional intelligence work, the kind of detail our analysts would kill for. He looked up at her with new respect. You've been running a one-woman guerrilla campaign. I have been surviving, Amina corrected, and killing the men who destroyed my life. If helping you rescue your pilot also kills more Taliban, then we both benefit. Chen stepped closer, his young face earnest. Look, we appreciate what you did for us. Really. But this is a combat mission. It's going to be dangerous and we can't guarantee. I do not need your guarantees, Amina interrupted, her dark eyes locking onto his. I need ammunition, food, and targets. You need a guide who knows this terrain and can eliminate threats before you see them. This is a transaction, not charity. Do we have an agreement? The bluntness seemed to catch the Rangers off guard. Reed glanced at his men, reading their expressions. She could see the doubt in some faces, the grudging respect in others. Finally, Reed nodded. We have an agreement, but you follow my orders. No heroics, no unnecessary risks, clear. Amina almost smiled at the irony, this American sergeant trying to prevent her from taking unnecessary risks when she'd been living on the edge of death for half a year. But she simply nodded. Orders she could follow, purpose she understood. These men needed her skills, and she needed their support to kill more Taliban. It was, as she'd said, a transaction. We move in 10 minutes, Reed announced to his team. Amina takes point with me. Chen, your rear security. Everyone else, standard patrol formation. And someone give her some water and energy bars. She looks half-starved. As the Rangers prepared to move, Bashir pulled Amina aside. Be careful, little one, he whispered in Pashto. These Americans, they are good men, but they do not understand what you have become. What this war has taken from you. Amina checked her rifle one final time, chambering around with practiced efficiency. What I have become is exactly what they need, old friend. A ghost who kills their enemies. Nothing more, nothing less. But as they began their trek toward the downed pilot, Amina couldn't shake the strange feeling of moving with a team again, of voices around her instead of the oppressive silence of solo operations. It felt foreign, almost uncomfortable. She'd been alone so long, she'd forgotten what it meant to fight alongside others. She wasn't sure she wanted to remember. The mountain path Amina led them down shouldn't have existed. It wound through impossible terrain, narrow ledges barely wide enough for a man's boots, hidden passages between rock formations that appeared solid until you were right on top of them, ancient goat trails that switchbacked up slopes so steep the Rangers had to use their hands to climb. Sergeant Reed followed directly behind Amina, watching her move through the landscape with an efficiency that bordered on supernatural. She never hesitated, never second-guessed her route, and somehow managed to find paths that kept them concealed from the valley floors below where Taliban patrols moved like ants. How the hell does she know all this? Whispered Specialist Thompson from somewhere in the column behind them. Corporal Chen, bringing up the rear, had been wondering the same thing. Every 20 minutes, Amina would raise her fist, the universal signal to halt, and disappear into the rocks. She'd return minutes later, sometimes reporting Taliban movements miles away that she'd spotted from vantage points, sometimes simply nodding that the route ahead was clear. It was like watching a wild animal in its native habitat, completely at home in an environment that had the rest of them sweating and struggling. 4 hours into their trek, Amina suddenly dropped to a crouch, her rifle coming up in one smooth motion. The Rangers froze, weapons ready, scanning for threats they couldn't see. Amina's hand signaled, "Enemy, 300 meters, moving toward us." Reed crawled forward to her position, pulling out his binoculars. Through the lenses, he saw them, a Taliban patrol moving along a parallel ridge, 6 fighters with AK-47s and RPGs. They hadn't spotted the Rangers yet, but their path would intersect the American position in less than 5 minutes. "We can wait them out," Reed whispered to Amina. "Let them pass, stay hidden." Amina shook her head, her eyes never leaving the enemy patrol. "They have radio. They will report American movement in area. More patrols will come. Every fighter in these mountains will know you are here. The pilot's location will be surrounded before we arrive." "So what do you suggest?" "I kill them quietly, before they radio." Reed studied her face, looking for bravado or fear. He found neither, just cold calculation. "All 6, at 300 meters, before any of them can key a radio." "Yes," she said it with the same tone someone might use to confirm the weather forecast. Absolute certainty. Behind them, Specialist Morrison had worked his way forward. "Sarge, no way. Not even our designated marksman could guarantee 6 kills before one gets off a radio call. It's impossible." Amina's dark eyes flicked to Morrison. She didn't argue, didn't try to convince him. She simply turned back to her rifle, making minute adjustments to her scope. "Then watch and learn, Specialist, or do not watch. It makes no difference to me." The Taliban patrol was moving single file along the ridge, strung out over about 50 meters. Standard patrol formation for mountain terrain. The lead man had a radio visible on his vest. So did the 4th man in line. Amina's breathing slowed, deepened. Reed recognized the pre-shot routine of a trained sniper, controlling heart rate, oxygenating blood, entering that zone where the entire world narrowed to the sight picture and the target. But he'd never seen someone transition into that state so quickly, so completely. "I take them front to back," Amina whispered, more to herself than the Americans. 6 seconds, maybe 7. Lead man first, he has radio. Then back man also radio. Then middle 4 before they understand what is happening. "Amina, wait," Reed started to say. The first shot cracked out, and the Taliban point man crumpled like a puppet with cut strings. Before his body hit the ground, Amina had worked her bolt, acquired her second target, and fired again. The rear guard, the man who'd been 30 meters behind the first, pitched forward, his radio tumbling from his hands and disappearing into a ravine. The middle 4 fighters had exactly 2 seconds to process what was happening. 2 seconds to reach for their radios, to shout warnings, to seek cover. They didn't get the chance. Crack, 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 crack. 4 shots in rapid succession, each barely a second apart. 4 bodies falling in a macabre sequence like dominoes. The entire engagement lasted 7 seconds, exactly as Amina had predicted. 6 enemy combatants eliminated before a single warning could be transmitted. The silence that followed was deafening. Morrison's jaw hung open. Chen had lowered his weapon, staring at the distant ridge where 6 bodies lay scattered. Thompson muttered something that might have been a prayer. Even Reed, who'd seen combat across multiple deployments, felt his hands trembling slightly. Amina ejected the spent magazine, loaded a fresh one with mechanical precision, and stood. "Route is clear now. We should move before their command wonders why they missed their radio check." She started walking, leaving the stunned Rangers behind. Chen found his voice first. That's not human. Nobody shoots like that. Nobody. She does, Reed said quietly, still staring at the killing ground. He'd counted the seconds. 7 shots, 6 kills at 300 meters, with targets spread across 50 meters of terrain, compensating for wind and elevation on each shot, no hesitation between targets. It defied everything he knew about marksmanship. They moved out, following Amina's steady pace. But the dynamic had shifted. The Rangers who'd been skeptical now watched her with something approaching awe. The ones who'd been in awe now seemed slightly afraid. She just demonstrated that she was operating on a completely different level than any of them. An hour later, they took a brief rest in a sheltered ravine. Chen approached Amina as she sat on a rock, cleaning her rifle with a piece of torn cloth. He pulled an energy bar from his pack and offered it to her. "Thanks for that," he said, "back there with the patrol." Amina accepted the bar mechanically, unwrapping it and eating without seeming to taste it. Fuel for the body, nothing more. "I told you I would handle them. I do not say things I cannot do." "Where did you learn to shoot like that?" Chen asked, settling onto a nearby rock. "I mean, really, your brother taught you, you said, but that kind of skill, that takes years. Thousands of rounds, professional training." For a long moment, Amina didn't answer. She continued cleaning her rifle, her movements precise and practiced. When she finally spoke, her voice was distant, as if she were recounting someone else's story. "My brother Khalid was Afghan National Police, elite unit trained by your Green Berets. He believed Afghanistan's future depended on strong citizens, not just strong men. So he taught me everything: shooting, tactics, survival. Every day after I finished school, we would go to the mountains. He would set up targets, teach me to read wind, to calculate distance, to control my breathing and heartbeat." She paused, her hands stilling on the rifle. "He said the Taliban fear educated women most of all. Women who can think, who can fight, who cannot be controlled. He wanted me to be someone they would fear, someone who could protect herself and others." "Sounds like he was a good man," Chen said softly. "He was the best man I have ever known." Amina's voice cracked slightly, the first real emotion Chen had heard from her. "When the Taliban came to our village, he organized the defense. He held them off for 3 hours, giving time for some people to escape. My mother made me hide in a cellar. I heard everything, every gunshot, every scream. My brother's voice calling out commands until the moment they killed him." She resumed cleaning her rifle, but Chen noticed her hands were trembling now. "The Taliban commander, after they killed my brother, he dragged his body to the village square. He announced that this is what happens to those who resist, who teach women to be strong. Then he ordered the school burned. My mother was a teacher there. She tried to get the students out. They locked the doors from outside and set it on fire." Chen felt his chest tighten. He'd heard stories about Taliban brutality, read intelligence reports, but hearing it from someone who'd lived through it was different. "Jesus. Amina, I'm so sorry." "Sorry does not bring them back," Amina said, her voice flat again, emotion locked away. "Sorry does not kill the men who did this. So I stopped being sorry. I stopped feeling anything except the need to make them pay. Every day, every shot, every Taliban fighter who falls, that is my payment. That is what my brother's training was for." She finished cleaning her rifle and reassembled it with practiced efficiency. "For 6 months, I have been hunting them. I learned their patterns, their routes, their habits. I study them the way a predator studies prey. I have killed 63 Taliban fighters. I know because I mark each one in my notebook. Each kill is one small payment for what they took from me." 63, Chen repeated, his voice barely a whisper. "You've killed 63 men in 6 months, by yourself." 69 now, Amina corrected, gesturing back toward the ridge where the patrol had fallen. "But it is never enough. There are always more. They are like locusts. You kill 100 and 200 more appear. But I keep killing them anyway because stopping means accepting what they did. I will never accept it." She stood, slinging her rifle across her back. Your sergeant wants to move soon. The pilot's crash site is still 4 hours away, and Taliban patrols increase closer to the target. We should eat and drink now while we can." Chen watched her walk away, his mind reeling. He thought he understood combat, understood what it meant to be a soldier. But this girl, this 19-year-old who should have been in college somewhere, worried about exams and dating, had become something else entirely. She transformed grief and rage into a weapon more deadly than any rifle. Reed appeared at Chen's shoulder, following his gaze to where Amina stood at the edge of the ravine, scanning the surrounding peaks with those unnervingly old eyes. "She's not going to make it," Reed said quietly. "Not like this. You can't sustain that level of trauma and rage without breaking eventually." "She's already broken, Sarge," Chen replied. "She's just too busy killing to notice." Reed nodded slowly. "Maybe that's why she agreed to help us. It's not about the pilot or the mission. It's just another opportunity to do the only thing she knows how to do anymore." "What's that?" "Survive by making sure the other guy dies first." A shout from Morrison interrupted them. "Sarge, Amina says we've got movement 2 ridges over. Looks like a larger patrol, maybe 12 fighters, heading toward the crash site." Reed grabbed his rifle. "All right, let's move. Stay sharp, stay quiet, and for God's sake, let Amina do her job. The woman's a professional killer whether we like it or not." As they resumed their trek, following the ghost-like figure of Amina through impossible terrain, Chen couldn't shake the image of those 6 bodies falling in perfect sequence. 7 seconds. 6 lives ended with the mechanical efficiency of someone who'd stopped seeing her enemies as human beings. He wondered if that's what happened when you fought alone for too long. You stopped seeing anything as human, including yourself. And he wondered if, by the time this mission was over, any of them would see Amina Nazari as anything other than the weapon she'd become. The sun was beginning its descent toward the western peaks when they found Captain Sarah Vance. The crash site was a devastating tableau, twisted metal scattered across a rocky slope, a black scar of burned earth marking where the F-16 had first impacted before tumbling another 100 meters down the mountainside. The ejection seat lay empty, partially buried in scree. Amina had led them to an overlooked position first, insisting on reconnaissance before approaching. Through binoculars, Reed scanned the wreckage, looking for any sign of the pilot. Nothing. No body, no movement, no indication whether Vance had survived the crash. "Taliban have not reached her yet," Amina whispered, pointing to the untouched wreckage. "They would have stripped equipment, set traps, but they are close, maybe 30 minutes behind us." "Then where's the pilot?" Morrison asked, scanning the area with his scope. Amina studied the terrain with the focused intensity of someone reading a familiar book. Her eyes traced the slope, the scree patterns, the disturbed rocks that most people would miss. "There," she said, pointing to a dark shadow beneath an overhanging rock formation 200 meters from the main wreckage. "Cave entrance. If I crashed here and could still move, that is where I would hide." Reed looked where she indicated. He couldn't see any cave, just rocks and shadows. "You sure?" "No," Amina admitted. "But it is what I would do. And see," she pointed to a barely visible line in the scree, "something was dragged, boot marks. She went that direction." They approached carefully, weapons ready, Amina moving point with Reed close behind. As they neared the rock formation, Reed finally saw what Amina had spotted from hundreds of meters away, a narrow opening in the rocks, partially concealed by fallen boulders. The kind of natural shelter that could save your life if you knew to look for it. "Captain Vance," Reed called out, "U.S. Army Rangers were here to extract you." A weak voice emerged from the darkness. "Rangers, thank God, I'm armed," coming out slowly. Captain Sarah Vance emerged from the cave entrance, and Reed's trained eye immediately cataloged her injuries. Left leg clearly broken, makeshift splint created from pieces of her flight suit and branches. Face bruised and swollen. Right arm cradled against her chest. but she was conscious, alert, and had managed to drag herself to shelter and survive for 18 hours in hostile territory. "How bad?" Reed asked as Morrison moved in to assess her injuries. "Compound fracture left femur, possible broken ribs, concussion, but I'm alive and I kept my sidearm and survival radio." Vance's eyes swept over the Rangers, then stopped on Amina. "Who's the girl?" "Long story, ma'am. She's friendly. Saved our asses getting here." Morrison worked quickly, administering pain medication and stabilizing Vance's leg properly. "We need to move her, but it's going to be slow. She can't walk, and carrying her through that terrain we just covered." "We don't go back that way," Amina interrupted. She'd been standing at the cave entrance, watching the surrounding peaks with unwavering attention. "Taliban patrols are moving to cut off that route. They know we are here now. They saw us approach." Reed felt ice in his stomach. "How do you know?" "Because I would have watchers on those peaks if this were my ambush." Amina pointed to 3 distant ridge lines. "They have been tracking us for the last hour, letting us find the pilot before they close the trap. Smarter than the patrol this morning. Those were scouts. These are hunters." Chen moved to the cave entrance beside her, raising his binoculars. "I don't see anything." "You will not see them until they want you to," Amina said flatly. "But they are there. Trust me or do not, your choice. But we need to move now and we need a different route." Reed made a command decision. "All right, Amina, you've been right about everything else. What's your recommendation?" Amina pulled out her worn notebook, flipping to a hand-drawn map that showed terrain details the Rangers' military maps didn't include. "There is a cave system, old from when Mujahideen fought Soviets. Extends 3 kilometers through the mountain, emerges near your extraction point. Taliban know about it, but they think it collapsed years ago. It did not. My village used it to hide supplies from both Soviets and Taliban." "A 3-kilometer cave tunnel," Thompson said incredulously. "In pitch darkness, carrying an injured pilot, possibly unstable. That's suicide." "Less suicide than fighting 40 Taliban fighters in open terrain while carrying wounded," Amina replied. "The cave entrance is 1 kilometer from here. Once inside, Taliban cannot follow in numbers. Narrow passages, choke points. One person with rifle can hold off many." Vance, pale but focused despite her pain, looked at Amina with sharp intelligence. "You know this cave system. You've been through it." "Many times. My family hid there during Soviet bombing. Later, my brother and I used it for training. I know every meter, every turn, every chamber. I can guide you through in darkness." Reed weighed the options. Stay and fight 40 Taliban fighters while protecting a critically injured pilot. Almost certainly a losing proposition. Try to move through open terrain with a litter, slow, exposed, probably equally suicidal. Or trust a 19-year-old girl to guide them through an unmapped cave system in complete darkness. Some choice. "How do we carry the captain through caves?" Morrison asked practically. Amina had already thought of this. "Make litter from branches and cord. In wide sections, 2 people carry. In narrow sections, we drag carefully. I went through with supply bundles before, heavier than person. It works." "You're talking about dragging an injured woman through caves for 3 kilometers, Chen protested. "I am talking about keeping her alive," Amina shot back, her dark eyes flashing with rare emotion. "You want different option, tell me. I will listen. But we have maybe 10 minutes before Taliban close their trap, so decide quickly." Reed looked at his Rangers, reading their expressions. Doubt, fear, but also grudging trust in this strange girl who'd proven herself repeatedly. He looked at Vance, who nodded slightly despite her pain. "We take the caves," Reed decided. "Morrison, prep the captain for movement. Chen, Thompson, construct a litter. Amina, lead us to this entrance. Move fast but stay quiet." They worked with efficient urgency, creating a makeshift litter from branches and paracord, securing Vance as comfortably as possible. Amina watched the peaks constantly, her rifle ready, her body language screaming danger even though the Rangers still couldn't see any threats. "They are moving into position," she said quietly to Reed. "We have 5 minutes, maybe less." "How can you possibly know that?" Amina pointed to a distant slope where birds had suddenly taken flight, disturbed by something below. Then to another area where dust rose almost imperceptibly into the air, the kind of dust created by multiple people moving quickly. "The mountains speak if you know how to listen. Taliban are converging. They will attack when we try to move the pilot. Standard tactic, wait until target is vulnerable, then strike." The litter was ready. 4 Rangers would rotate carrying Vance, with the others providing security. Amina would lead, using her intimate knowledge of the terrain to find the fastest route to the cave entrance. "Move out," Reed ordered. They'd gone less than 200 meters when the first shots rang out. Reed had expected it, but the volume of fire still shocked him. At least 30 weapons opening up simultaneously from multiple positions. The Taliban had indeed set a trap, and they'd sprung it with professional timing. "Run!" Reed shouted, though his Rangers were already moving. Bullets ricocheted off rocks, sent up geysers of dirt, whined through the air with lethal intent. The 4 men carrying Vance stumbled over rough terrain, trying to balance speed with not injuring her further. Amina had dropped to one knee, her rifle already speaking. Reed saw 3 Taliban fighters fall in rapid succession, the ones who'd exposed themselves to get better firing angles. She wasn't trying to win the firefight, just buying seconds for the Rangers to move. "Amina, move!" Reed yelled, laying down suppressing fire with his M4. She fired twice more, then sprinted after them with the grace of a mountain goat, somehow avoiding the bullets that chewed up the ground around her. The Rangers ran in controlled chaos, weapons barking, boots pounding, carrying their injured pilot toward a cave entrance they couldn't see but had to trust existed. "There," Amina shouted, pointing to a cluster of boulders ahead. "Between the rocks, the entrance." Reed saw it now, a dark gap between massive stones, barely wide enough for a man to squeeze through. It looked like certain death, a trap, anything but salvation. But Amina was already there, disappearing into the darkness. The Rangers reached the entrance, shoving the litter through first, Vance gritting her teeth against the pain of rough handling. Chen and Morrison squeezed through next, then Thompson. Reed and the remaining Rangers laid down covering fire, watching Taliban fighters swarming down the slopes toward them. "Move, move, move!" Reed screamed, firing in controlled bursts. The last Rangers squeezed through the gap. Reed took one final look at the approaching enemy, at least 40 fighters, maybe more, then ducked into the cave entrance. Bullets sparked off the rocks where his head had been a second before. Inside, the darkness was absolute. Reed couldn't see his hand in front of his face. He heard his Rangers breathing hard, heard Vance's labored gasps of pain, heard the Taliban fighters shouting outside in Pashto. Then a small LED light flicked on Amina's headlamp, revealing a narrow passage leading deeper into the mountain. Her face was streaked with dust and sweat, but her expression was calm, almost serene. This was her element, her territory. "They will try to follow," she said quietly. "But the entrance is narrow. I will hold it while you move the pilot deeper. There is a chamber 50 meters ahead where we can rest and plan." "Amina, you can't hold off 40 men alone," Chen protested. She checked her rifle, her movements mechanical and practiced. "I do not need to hold them off. I just need to kill the first few who try to enter. The rest will think carefully before following. Fear is a weapon too." Reed wanted to argue, wanted to insist they stay together, but tactically she was right. The narrow entrance was a perfect choke point. One person with a rifle could create a horrific killing ground that would make anyone think twice about pursuit. 5 minutes, Reed said. "Then you fall back to our position, that's an order." Amina nodded, already positioning herself where she had a clear view of the entrance gap. The sounds of Taliban fighters organizing outside grew louder, shouts, running boots, weapons being readied. The Rangers moved deeper into the cave, carrying Vance, their lights creating dancing shadows on ancient stone walls. Reed looked back one more time to see Amina silhouetted against the dim light from outside, a small figure with a rifle, preparing to hold off an army. He wondered if he'd just ordered a 19-year-old girl to her death. Then her rifle cracked once, twice, and screaming echoed from outside. The sounds of pursuit stopped abruptly. Maybe, Reed thought as he followed his team deeper into the mountain, the Taliban should be more worried about her than the other way around. After all, she was the ghost in these mountains. And ghosts were very hard to kill. The cave chamber Amina had promised opened up 50 meters into the mountain, a natural room carved by water over millennia, about 20 feet across with a ceiling high enough to stand. The Rangers set Captain Vance down carefully, and Morrison immediately went to work checking her vitals by flashlight. "She's stable, but we need to get her out of here soon," Morrison reported. "Blood pressure's dropping, and I'm worried about internal bleeding from those ribs." Reed checked his watch. Amina had been holding the entrance for 4 minutes. He could hear occasional gunfire echoing through the tunnel, single, precise shots followed by screams and angry shouting in Pashto. The Taliban were learning the hard way that pushing into a narrow cave passage against an entrenched sniper was suicide. "I'm going back for her," Reed announced, checking his weapon. Chen grabbed his arm. "Sarge," she said, 5 minutes, it's been 4, give her another minute." As if on cue, they heard rapid footsteps approaching. Amina emerged from the darkness, moving at a steady jog, her rifle slung across her back. Even in the dim light, Reed could see fresh blood splattered across her clothes, none of it hers. "How many?" Reed asked. 4 tried to enter, 4 died. The rest will not follow immediately. They are arguing outside, some want to wait for us to emerge, others want to try smoke or grenades. But this cave has many side passages and ventilation from above. Smoke will not work." She paused, catching her breath. "We have maybe 30 minutes before they organize properly. We should move." "You're bleeding," Morrison observed, pointing to her left shoulder where her shirt was torn and darkening with blood. Amina glanced down as if noticing for the first time. "Ricochet. Fragment of bullet hit rock, rock fragment hit me. Not serious." "Let me see it," Morrison insisted, moving toward her with his medical kit. "Later," Amina said firmly, already pulling out her hand-drawn cave map. "We need to move while we have advantage. Captain Vance cannot afford delays." "Amina," Reed started. "I said later." The sudden flash of emotion startled everyone. Amina's voice had risen to almost a shout, her hands trembling as she held the map. For a moment, the mask of cold efficiency cracked, and they saw what lay beneath. A traumatized teenager running on adrenaline and willpower, held together by purpose and rage. She closed her eyes, took a shuddering breath, and when she opened them again, the mask was back in place. But Reed had seen enough. The girl was at her breaking point, operating on fumes and determination. "Everyone takes 5 minutes, Reed ordered. "Drink water, eat something, check equipment. Morrison, you have 2 minutes to look at Amina's shoulder whether she likes it or not. Amina, that's an order, not a request." For a moment, he thought she'd refuse. Then she nodded stiffly and allowed Morrison to examine the wound. The medic cleaned it quickly, a 3-inch gash across her shoulder where a rock fragment had torn through muscle. Not life-threatening, but painful and still bleeding. "This needs stitches," Morrison said, preparing a needle. "No time," Amina replied. "Bandage it, I can still shoot." "You can barely lift your left arm." "I shoot right-handed. My left arm only supports the rifle. I have done this before with worse injuries." She said it matter-of-factly, and Reed believed her. This girl had probably operated alone with injuries that would have sent most soldiers to medevac. Morrison worked quickly, applying pressure bandages and giving her antibiotics from his kit. Amina accepted the treatment with the same mechanical detachment she showed everything else, as if her body were just another piece of equipment to maintain. Chen approached her, offering an energy bar and water bottle. "You need to eat something. When's the last time you had a real meal?" Amina had to think about it. 2 days, maybe 3. Bashir brings food when he can, but Taliban activity has been heavy, difficult for him to move. 3 days, Thompson blurted. "You've been operating for 3 days without food." "I have operated for longer," Amina said simply, accepting the energy bar. She ate mechanically, chewing without tasting, her eyes constantly scanning the cave entrance behind them. Even while eating, even while being treated, she remained vigilant. Reed studied her in the flashlight's glow. Her hands were shaking, fine tremors she couldn't quite control. Her eyes had dark circles that looked like bruises. Her movements, usually fluid and precise, had taken on a jerky quality that spoke of exhaustion and stress. She was running on empty, and they still had 3 kilometers of caves to navigate with 40 Taliban fighters potentially on their trail. "Amina," Reed said quietly, sitting down beside her. "When we get through this, when we reach the extraction point, you're coming with us. Back to base, hot meal, real medical treatment, proper rest." She didn't look at him. "And then what? You send me back to refugee camp, back to nothing. I have work here, Taliban to kill, that is my purpose." "Your purpose is going to get you killed. You can't sustain this forever." "I do not need forever," Amina replied, her voice flat. "I just need long enough to kill as many of them as possible before they kill me. That is acceptable." Chen, who'd been listening, couldn't stay quiet. "That's not acceptable. That's suicide with extra steps. You're 19 years old, you've got your whole life ahead of you." Amina finally turned to look at him, and the emptiness in her eyes made Chen step back. "My life ended 6 months ago when my family burned. What continues now is just momentum. A weapon that has not yet been destroyed, still firing, still serving its purpose. When I am no longer useful, when the Taliban finally kill me, that will simply be the end of the momentum. There is nothing else." The Rangers exchanged uncomfortable glances. They'd all seen combat stress, seen soldiers pushed to their limits, but this was different. This was someone who'd made peace with death, who'd stopped seeing herself as human. Captain Vance, listening despite her pain medication haze, spoke up. "That's what they want, you know, the Taliban. They want you to become exactly what you've described, a weapon without humanity. Because weapons can be destroyed, but people with hope and dreams and connections, those are dangerous. Those are what they actually fear." Amina's jaw tightened. "Then they should fear me, because I am very dangerous." "You're missing her point," Reed said gently. "You think you're just a weapon, but what scares the Taliban isn't your rifle skills. It's what you represent. An Afghan woman who refused to submit, who fought back, who survived despite everything they did to break you. That's why they'd hunt you even if you stopped fighting tomorrow. Because you're proof that they can't win." For a long moment, Amina said nothing. Then she stood abruptly, slinging her rifle across her back. "We should move. Taliban will not wait forever." She was closing down again, retreating behind her walls. Reed recognized the defensive mechanism. When emotions threaten to overwhelm, focus on the mission, on the next task, on anything except the pain beneath. They formed up, 4 Rangers carrying Vance's litter, others providing security. Amina led them deeper into the cave system, her headlamp cutting through absolute darkness. The tunnel narrowed, forcing them to move single file, sometimes having to angle the litter to squeeze through tight passages. "These caves saved many lives during Soviet occupation," Amina said quietly as they walked, her voice echoing off stone walls. "My grandfather hid here with other mujahideen. Later, during civil war, families hid here from warlords. Now I hide here from Taliban. Same mountains, same caves, different enemies. Afghanistan is always at war." They passed side passages, some blocked by ancient rockfalls, others leading deeper into unknown darkness. Amina navigated by memory and instinct, never hesitating at intersections, always choosing the correct path. Reed tried to map their route mentally but gave up after the seventh turn. Without her, they'd be hopelessly lost in minutes. An hour into the cave trek, they heard sounds behind them, distant voices, lights flickering in the tunnel they'd left. The Taliban had overcome their fear and were pursuing. Amina stopped, listening to the echoes. They move too fast. They will catch us before we exit. She studied the tunnel ahead, then pointed to a side passage. There, natural choke point. Rock formation creates bottleneck. I can hold them while you continue. Absolutely not, Reed said firmly. We stick together. Sergeant, be logical. Carrying the captain, you move slowly. Taliban move fast with no wounded. Mathematics says they will overtake you, unless someone slows them down. Her voice was calm, analytical. I am the logical choice. I know these caves, I can defend the position, and I can escape through side passages if necessary. No, Chen said, stepping forward. We're not leaving you behind. That's not how Rangers operate. Amina's expression softened slightly, the first genuine emotion Reed had seen from her beyond cold efficiency. You barely know me. I am not even American. Why do you care? Because, Chen said, pulling his lucky compass from his pocket, you risked your life for us, multiple times. That makes you one of us, whether you're American or not. He pressed the compass into her hand. Rangers don't leave Rangers behind, ever. Amina stared at the compass, her fingers closing around it. Her hands were shaking worse now, and Reed saw tears forming in her eyes, tears she'd probably been holding back for 6 months. I don't know how to be anything except this, she whispered, so quietly they almost didn't hear. I don't remember how to be a person instead of a weapon. I don't know if I can. You don't have to figure it out right now, Vance said from her litter, her voice strained but steady. Right now, you just need to get us through these caves. The rest, being human again, finding purpose beyond killing, that comes later when we're all safe. One step at a time. The voices behind them were getting closer. Amina wiped her eyes roughly, clearing away the moment of vulnerability, but she kept Chen's compass clutched tightly in her left hand. There is another way, she said, studying her mental map of the caves. Faster but more dangerous. A section where cave ceiling is unstable, rockfall from earthquakes. If we move carefully, we pass through. If we move carefully and block the passage behind us, Taliban cannot follow, but timing must be perfect. How unstable are we talking? Thompson asked nervously. Unstable enough that wrong vibration could bring down tons of rock, but also unstable enough that right vibration, in right place, definitely brings down tons of rock. Reed understood immediately. You want to cause a controlled collapse behind us, seal the tunnel, trap the Taliban on the other side. Yes, we pass through. I place small explosive charge from my pack. We detonate from safe distance. Tunnel collapses, Taliban cannot follow. We reach exit without pursuit. You're carrying explosives, Morrison asked incredulously. Always, Amina replied, patting a pouch on her vest. You never know when you need to destroy a Taliban ammunition cache or supply truck. Plastique is very useful. Of course, this 19-year-old girl carried military explosives as casually as other teenagers carried makeup. Reed almost laughed at the absurdity of it all. All right, he decided. We do it your way, but you set the charge and get out. No heroics, no last stands, clear. Amina nodded, already moving forward with renewed purpose. They followed her through increasingly unstable passages, seeing cracks in the ceiling, piles of rubble from previous collapses, sections where their footsteps caused dust to rain down ominously. Finally, they reached a chamber where the ceiling looked like it was barely holding itself up. A spiderweb of cracks, loose rock, geological instability frozen in a moment of uncertain equilibrium. Through here quickly but carefully, Amina instructed. No loud noises, no touching walls, just move. They crossed the chamber in tense silence, every footstep placed with precision, carrying Vance's litter like it contained nitroglycerine. Reed kept expecting the entire ceiling to come down on their heads, but Amina's judgment proved sound. They reached the far side safely. Amina stayed behind, working quickly with plastique explosive and detonator cord. The Taliban voices were very close now, perhaps just minutes away. "Amina, time to go," Reed called. She placed the final charge, connected the wire, and sprinted toward them. They moved 50 meters down the tunnel, crouched behind a bend in the rock wall. Amina held the detonator, Chen's compass still clutched in her other hand. The first Taliban fighters entered the unstable chamber, their flashlights sweeping across the cracked ceiling. At least a dozen men, moving quickly, confidently, not realizing they just walked into a tomb. Amina looked at Reed. He nodded. She pressed the detonator. The explosion was muffled but devastating. The unstable chamber ceiling, already stressed beyond its limits, gave up its ancient battle with gravity. Thousands of tons of rock collapsed in a thundering avalanche, filling the chamber, sealing the tunnel completely. The screams were brief, then silence. Dust billowed down the tunnel toward them, forcing the rangers to cover their faces. When the dust settled where there had been a passage, now there was only solid rock. No way through, no way back. And somewhere behind that rock, trapped in darkness, were the Taliban fighters who'd been hunting them. Amina stared at the collapsed tunnel, her expression unreadable. Then she looked down at Chen's compass, still in her hand, its presence somehow grounding her. "Come on," she said quietly. "Exit is 1 kilometer ahead. We need to keep moving." But as they walked, Reed noticed something different about her movements. The mechanical efficiency was still there, but something had shifted. Maybe it was holding Chen's compass, that tangible symbol that someone cared whether she lived or died. Maybe it was Vance's words about being human instead of a weapon. Maybe it was just exhaustion finally cracking through her armor. Whatever it was, when Reed caught her eye in the flashlight's glow, he saw something he hadn't seen before. Not hope exactly, but maybe the faint possibility of hope, the first crack in the walls she'd built around herself. It was a start. They emerged from the caves into the fatting light of dusk, the exit hidden behind a waterfall that barely trickled during the dry season. Amina had led them through the mountain's heart with the confidence of someone who knew every stone, every turn, every secret passage. The 3-kilometer journey had taken 2 hours of careful navigation, but they'd made it with Captain Vance still conscious and no Taliban pursuit. Reed immediately radioed for extraction. "Viper 6, Ranger 2-1, we have the package. Request immediate medevac, grid November Whiskey 783472. Copy 2-1, birds inbound, ETA 22 minutes. LZ is hot, Taliban forces converging on your position from multiple directions. You need to move 2 clicks northeast to designated extraction point. How copy?" Reed's stomach sank as he studied his map. 2 kilometers northeast meant crossing an open valley, the kind of terrain that would leave them completely exposed. With a critically injured pilot who couldn't walk, they'd be moving at a crawl while Taliban fighters closed in from all sides. "Roger, Viper 6, moving to extraction point now." He turned to his team. "All right, we've got 22 minutes to cover 2 clicks with hostiles converging. 4 of you on litter rotation, everyone else provides security. Move fast but stay alert." They started across the valley as the sun touched the western peaks, painting the sky in shades of orange and red. Beautiful and deadly. There was no concealment here, just open ground and scattered rocks that wouldn't stop bullets. Reed felt exposed, vulnerable, waiting for the first shots to ring out. Amina ranged ahead, constantly scanning with her scope, looking for threats before they materialized. She moved differently now. Reed noticed her favoring her injured shoulder, saw her stumble once on terrain she'd normally navigate effortlessly. The 2 hours of cave navigation, the blood loss, the days without proper food or rest, It was all catching up with her. Amina, fall back to the main group, Reed ordered. You're in no condition to be running point. She ignored him, continuing her forward position. Then she froze, dropping to one knee and raising her fist. The Rangers hit the ground instantly, weapons ready. Through his binoculars, Reed saw what had stopped her: Taliban fighters, at least 20 of them, positioned along the ridgeline directly between the Rangers and their extraction point. They weren't moving, weren't searching. They were waiting, setting up an ambush at the exact spot the Rangers needed to reach. They know where the LZ is, Chen whispered. How the hell do they know? Because they have been listening to your radio frequencies, Amina said quietly, crawling back to Reed's position. Taliban are not stupid. They have scanners, interpreters, intelligence networks. They heard your extraction request. They know exactly where you need to go. Reed cursed under his breath. She was right. He'd been careless, assuming tactical radio frequencies were secure in such a remote area. But the Taliban had been fighting here for decades. They knew how Americans operated, knew extraction procedures, knew to monitor frequencies and set traps accordingly. Viper 6, be advised, LZ is compromised. Enemy forces in position, approximately 20 hostiles. Copy 2-1. Birds can provide gun runs but not danger close with that many enemies. You need to clear that LZ or we can't land. Reed looked at his 7 exhausted Rangers, at the injured pilot, at the 20 Taliban fighters dug into perfect defensive positions. The math was brutally simple. They couldn't win a frontal assault, couldn't go around without missing the extraction window, and couldn't stay here with more enemies converging every minute. Amina was studying the terrain with that analytical intensity Reed had learned to respect. There is another way, she said finally, but you will not like it. Tell me anyway. She pointed to a rocky outcrop 600 meters from the Taliban position, elevated and with clear sight lines to the entire enemy formation. From there, I can engage them, kill their officers first, create confusion, force them to take cover. While they are focused on me, your team moves through the valley to extraction point. I provide overwatch until helicopters arrive, then I escape through that ravine system. She traced a route with her finger. 3 kilometers through narrow passages where they cannot follow in numbers. I emerge near old Soviet outpost, where Bashir can meet me. Absolutely not, Reed said immediately. That's a suicide mission. You'd be alone against 20 fighters with no backup and a wounded shoulder. I would be in superior tactical position with clear fields of fire, Amina corrected. They would be exposed, confused, and focused on finding me rather than shooting at you carrying the captain. It is the best option for mission success. Mission success doesn't mean sacrificing you. Amina's dark eyes met his steadily. Why not? I am one person. You are 8 soldiers plus a pilot. 9 American lives versus 1 Afghan girl. The mathematics are clear. That's not how we calculate things, Chen interrupted, crawling over to join the conversation. People aren't just numbers in an equation. Then you are foolish, Amina said bluntly. War is mathematics. Resources, casualties, acceptable losses. I am acceptable loss for mission success. Captain Vance, listening from her litter despite her pain medication, spoke up weakly. Sergeant Reed, I'm the mission objective here. What's your tactical assessment? Reed gritted his teeth. Tactically, Amina's plan made horrifying sense. A skilled sniper in an elevated position could absolutely create enough chaos to allow the Rangers to reach the LZ. But it violated everything he believed about leaving no one behind, about protecting those who'd helped you. There has to be another way, he insisted. Tell me, Amina challenged. You have 15 minutes before extraction window closes. Taliban forces are converging. You have wounded pilot who cannot walk. You have open ground to cross while enemy holds high ground. What is your alternative plan, Sergeant? Reed ran through options frantically. Call for danger close air support, too risky with Vance injured. Try to fight through too many enemies. Wait for more reinforcements, no time. Circle around, would miss extraction window and get caught between multiple Taliban units. Every tactical option led to the same conclusion. Without someone providing covering fire from that outcrop, they couldn't make it to the LZ alive. There's got to be, Reed started. There is not, Amina interrupted. I know you want different answer. I know your culture, your rules say you do not leave people behind. But sometimes, Sergeant, survival requires sacrifice, and I am choosing to make it. You're 19 years old, Morrison burst out. You've got your whole life. I have nothing. Amina's voice cracked with sudden fury. My family is dead, my village is ash. My entire life is killing Taliban and waiting for them to kill me. At least this way my death means something. At least this way I save people instead of just destroying people. Do you understand? This is the first time in 6 months that my killing might actually save lives instead of just taking them. The outburst left her shaking, tears streaming down her dust-covered face. The mask had completely shattered, revealing the traumatized teenager beneath, someone desperate for her life to mean something beyond violence and revenge. Chen moved beside her, placing his hand on her uninjured shoulder. You want your life to mean something? Then survive. Come back with us. Let us help you build something instead of just destroying things. But you can't do that if you're dead. I am already dead, Amina whispered. I died with my family. I just have not stopped moving yet. That's the trauma talking, Vance said quietly. Trust me, Amina, I know what it's like to think you're already dead, to think nothing matters anymore. I thought that after my daughter died, after my marriage fell apart. I volunteered for the most dangerous missions because I didn't care if I came back. But you know what? Surviving when you think you're already dead, that's when you discover what you're actually capable of. That's when you find new reasons to live. Amina wiped her eyes roughly, trying to rebuild her emotional walls. But Chen's compass was still in her hand, and she kept looking at it like an anchor. I will not die, she said finally, her voice steadier. I have survived 6 months alone against Taliban. I know these mountains, know how to disappear, know how to escape. I will create diversion. You reach extraction point, helicopters arrive, I escape through ravine system. We all survive. No sacrifice necessary. Reed studied her face, searching for certainty, for confidence, for any sign she believed her own words. What he saw instead was determination mixed with resignation, the look of someone who'd made peace with whatever outcome came. Amina, I need you to promise me something, Reed said. When we reach the LZ, you fall back immediately. The second those helicopters touch down, you disengage and run. Don't stay to make sure we're aboard, don't wait to see if we need more cover. You run and you don't stop until you're safe. Can you promise me that? Amina looked at him for a long moment, then she held up Chen's compass. I promise to return this. I do not break promises. That's not an answer. It is the only answer I can give. She stood, checking her rifle, counting her remaining ammunition. 43 rounds left. I move into position now. Wait 10 minutes, then start moving toward LZ. When you hear my first shots, move fast. Do not stop, do not look back, just move. Understand? Reed wanted to argue more, wanted to order her to stay, wanted to find some brilliant tactical solution that didn't involve this traumatized teenager facing impossible odds alone. But time was running out, and they were out of options. 10 minutes, he agreed reluctantly. Then you start shooting and we move. And Amina, he waited until she met his eyes. We're coming back for you. Soon as Vance is secure, we're coming back with a full team to make sure you get out. That's a promise. Amina's lips curved in something that might have been a smile. You are kind to say that, even if it is lie. It is nice to be told someone cares. It's not a lie, Chen said fiercely. You're one of us now. Rangers don't abandon rangers. She looked at each of them, these American soldiers who'd known her for less than a day but who'd somehow decided her life mattered. Something in her expression softened, the eternal hardness cracking just slightly. Then I will try very hard not to die, she said quietly, because it would be good to know what it feels like to belong somewhere again. Without another word, she turned and began moving toward the outcrop, her small figure disappearing into the rocks and shadows of the approaching night. Reed watched her go, feeling like he'd just made the worst decision of his military career. Chen settled beside him, his face troubled. "Sarge, we're really going to let her do this?" "We don't have a choice, Corporal. Sometimes command means making impossible decisions." "What if she doesn't make it out?" Reed didn't answer, because he was wondering the same thing and he didn't have any good answers. In the distance, they saw Amina reach the outcrop and settle into position, her rifle steady despite her wounded shoulder. She was ready. The question was whether they could live with themselves if this was the last time they saw her alive. "All right, Rangers," Reed said quietly, checking his watch. 8 minutes to movement. Get ready to run like hell and don't look back." But even as he said it, he knew looking back was exactly what he'd do. Because against all odds, in less than a day, this ghost of a girl had become someone worth looking back for. And if she didn't make it out, he'd carry that weight for the rest of his life. Amina settled into her firing position on the rocky outcrop, her breathing slow and controlled despite the pain radiating from her shoulder. 600 meters below, the Taliban fighters were positioned along the ridgeline in a textbook ambush formation. Machine gun nests at both flanks, riflemen spaced at intervals, officers in the center coordinating through hand signals and radios. 23 fighters, she counted, not 20 as Reed had estimated. 3 more had arrived while the Rangers prepared to move. The mathematics had just gotten worse. She checked her ammunition one final time. 43 rounds in her magazine and pouches. 43 bullets for 23 enemies if she could force the Rangers to safety before her ammunition ran out. The numbers were tight but workable. She'd operated with worse odds. Through her scope, she identified the Taliban commander, older, with a distinctive gray beard, carrying himself with the authority that came from years of combat. He was positioned centrally, directing his men with practiced efficiency. Kill him first, and the command structure would fracture. Military theory she'd learned from her brother Khalid, now put into practice for perhaps the final time. Her radio crackled softly, Reed's voice tense. "Huntress, we're in position, on your signal." Amina keyed her mic with her left hand, her right steady on the rifle despite the trembling in her arms from exhaustion and blood loss. "Understood. When I fire 3 shots rapidly, you move. Do not stop for anything. Promise me." A pause, then, "We promise, and Amina, we meant what we said, we're coming back for you." She almost believed him, almost let herself imagine a future beyond the next 45 minutes, beyond this mountainside, beyond the endless cycle of killing and surviving. But hope was dangerous. It made you hesitate, made you vulnerable. Better to focus on the immediate: wind speed, range calculation, target acquisition. "I know," she lied softly. "Now get ready to run." She released the radio and settled fully into her shooting position, becoming one with the rifle, with the rock, with the mountain itself. Her breathing slowed further, her heartbeat dropping to the controlled rhythm that preceded killing. The pain in her shoulder faded to background noise. The exhaustion became irrelevant. There was only the scope, the targets, and the mathematics of death. The gray-bearded commander was gesturing to his men, clearly frustrated that the Americans hadn't appeared yet. He pulled out a radio, probably calling for reinforcements or updating his own command about the delay. Amina placed her crosshairs on his chest, compensating for wind, for elevation, for the Earth's rotation at this distance. She exhaled slowly, half a breath, and squeezed the trigger. The commander jerked backward, his radio flying from his hands as the 7.62 round punched through his sternum. Before his body hit the ground, Amina had already worked her bolt, acquired her second target, the machine gunner on the left flank, and fired. The gunner slumped over his weapon. Third shot, the machine gunner on the right flank. He fell before understanding why his commander and counterpart had died. 3 shots in 4 seconds, 3 key positions eliminated, command structure decapitated. "Move," Amina shouted into her radio, then dropped it. She wouldn't need it anymore. Through her scope, she saw the Rangers burst from cover, running at full sprint across the valley floor with Vance's litter bouncing between 4 soldiers. They were exposed, vulnerable, perfect targets for the remaining Taliban fighters. But those fighters were no longer focused on ambush positions. They were scrambling for cover, shouting in confusion, trying to locate the sniper who just killed 3 men in seconds, exactly as Amina had planned. She found her 4th target, a fighter pointing toward her position, having spotted her muzzle flash. She fired and he tumbled down the rocky slope. 5th target, another fighter raising his rifle toward the running Rangers. He dropped mid-aim. 6th target, a fighter on his radio, probably calling for help. The radio went silent permanently. The Taliban formation was dissolving into chaos. Some fighters were firing wildly toward her position, their bullets striking rocks 30 meters away, panic fire, undisciplined and ineffective. Others were trying to regroup, to establish new command, to organize a response. Amina didn't give them time. 7th shot, 8th, 9th. Each bullet found its target with mechanical precision. A fighter trying to reach the abandoned machine gun, an officer attempting to rally the men, a sniper setting up on an opposing ridge to counter her. The Rangers were halfway to the extraction point now, Chen and Morrison carrying the front of Vance's litter, Thompson and another Ranger at the rear. Reed ran alongside them, occasionally firing behind to discourage pursuit that hadn't materialized because every Taliban fighter was focused on survival rather than ambush. Amina's world narrowed to a rhythm: identify, aim, compensate, fire, cycle, bolt, repeat. Her shoulder screamed with each recoil, blood seeping through Morrison's bandages and staining her shirt. Her hands trembled from exhaustion, but the rifle stayed steady, her breathing controlled, her shots precise. 15th round, 16th, 17th. Then her worst fear materialized. In the distance, she heard engines, vehicles approaching fast, probably carrying reinforcements. The Taliban fighters below heard it too, their morale surging with the promise of support. They began organizing, preparing to pursue the Rangers once their reinforcements arrived. Amina couldn't allow that. She shifted her focus from individual fighters to the approaching vehicles, 2 Toyota trucks mounted with machine guns, packed with fighters, racing along the valley road toward the extraction point. If they reached the Rangers before the helicopters arrived, it would be a massacre. She calculated quickly. The lead truck, 800 meters, moving at approximately 60 kilometers per hour, bouncing over rough terrain. Impossible shot for most snipers, difficult even for her, but necessary. She led the target, compensating for movement and distance, and fired at the driver. The truck swerved violently as the driver slumped, then rolled as it hit a boulder at speed. The vehicle tumbled down an embankment in a cloud of dust and screaming metal, ejecting fighters like rag dolls. The second truck stopped abruptly, fighters jumping out and taking cover. They'd learned the danger of movement, but their halt gave the Rangers precious additional seconds. Through her scope, Amina checked on the Americans. They'd covered 3/4 of the distance to the LZ. She could hear helicopters now, the distinctive thump of Black Hawk rotors echoing across the valley. 2 minutes, maybe 3, until extraction. The Taliban fighters below had located her position and were concentrating fire. Bullets whined past her head, struck rocks around her position, sent up geysers of stone fragments. One ricocheted close enough to tear her sleeve, another struck her pack. She ignored them all, continuing to fire with methodical precision. 25th round, 26th, 27th. A bullet struck the rock directly in front of her scope, showering her face with fragments. She felt blood trickling from her forehead but didn't stop. Couldn't stop. The Rangers needed every second she could buy them. Through the scope, she saw Reed's team reach the LZ, a flat area marked with colored smoke where the helicopters could land. The first Black Hawk was approaching, descending through hostile fire with door gunners returning suppression. "Go," Amina whispered, though no one could hear her. "Get on the helicopter and go. Live, survive, be worth this." The helicopter touched down, rotors still spinning. Rangers Lote advanced first, handling her litter with practiced efficiency despite the incoming fire. Then the others began boarding, Reed counting heads, ensuring everyone was accounted for. Amina fired her 32nd round, her 33rd, her 34th. Each shot buying another second, keeping Taliban heads down, preventing them from organizing effective fire on the exposed helicopter. Then she saw Chen, standing outside the helicopter, refusing to board, searching the mountainside with binoculars. Looking for her. The idiot was looking for her instead of getting to safety. "Get on the helicopter," she growled, though he couldn't possibly hear. "Keep your promise, go." Reed was shouting at Chen, physically trying to pull him toward the Black Hawk, but Chen was pointing toward her position, arguing, gesturing frantically. Other Rangers joined the argument, precious seconds ticking away while they stood exposed in a hot LZ. Amina keyed her dropped radio with her boot, bringing it close enough to speak. "Corporal Chen, get on that helicopter now. That is an order." She heard his voice crackle back, desperate and determined. "Not without you. You promised to return my compass. Rangers don't leave Rangers behind." The second helicopter had landed, its crew chief waving frantically for the remaining Rangers to board. But they weren't moving, weren't leaving, and suddenly Amina understood with horrible clarity. They were waiting for her. These crazy Americans were risking their entire extraction because they'd decided she mattered. Taliban fighters were advancing now, emboldened by the chaos, moving toward the LZ in a final desperate assault. Amina had maybe 10 rounds left. The helicopter crews were screaming at the Rangers to board, and her shoulder had gone numb in a way that probably meant serious nerve damage. She made her decision in a heartbeat. "Southeast Ridge," she spoke into the radio, her voice cold and clear. "Moving to extract point now. Do not wait. I will reach second helicopter. 60 seconds." It was a lie. The Southeast Ridge was 300 meters away through hostile terrain. She couldn't make it in 60 seconds with a wounded shoulder and depleted ammunition. But maybe the lie would convince them to board, to save themselves while she held the Taliban back long enough for the helicopters to lift off. Through her scope, she saw Reed's face, torn between duty and doubt, understanding the mathematics but hating them. Then he nodded sharply, grabbed Chen, and physically dragged him toward the first helicopter. The Rangers boarded in disciplined haste, the first Black Hawk lifting off immediately with Vance and half the team. The second helicopter's rotors increased pitch, preparing to follow. Amina fired her remaining rounds in rapid succession, creating a wall of suppressing fire that forced the Taliban to seek cover one final time. Each shot was precise despite her failing strength, each bullet finding its target. 7 rounds, 7 Taliban fighters down, 3 rounds left. The second helicopter began to lift. Through her scope, Amina could see Chen at the door, Chen's compass clutched in his hand, his face anguished as he scanned the ridgeline for any sign of her movement. "I'm sorry," she whispered, knowing he couldn't hear. "I'm sorry I lied, but you're worth the lie. You're all worth it." She used her last 3 rounds to drop the Taliban fighters who'd gotten closest to the LZ, ensuring the helicopters had clear airspace. Then her bolt locked back on an empty chamber. No more ammunition. No more options. The helicopters were climbing now, banking away from the valley, door gunners providing final suppressing fire. They were safe. The mission was complete. Captain Vance would survive, the Rangers would survive, and Amina Nazari, the ghost of the mountains, had finally found a death worth dying. She laid down her empty rifle and pulled out Chen's compass, studying it in the fading light. A simple instrument, well-worn, with scratches that spoke of years of use. She wondered what journeys it had guided him through, what meaning it held for him. Taliban fighters were closing on her position now, shouting in Pashto, calling for her capture rather than death. They wanted the infamous girl sniper alive, wanted to make an example of her, wanted to break her publicly as a warning to other Afghan women who might resist. Amina smiled grimly and stood, compass in hand, looking down at the valley where the helicopters were disappearing into the distance. She'd bought them escape with her bullets and her lies. That was enough. She heard movement behind her, Taliban fighters climbing the outcrop, cutting off her planned escape route through the ravine. More fighters approached from below. 20+ enemies, and she had no ammunition left. Just her sidearm with one magazine, her knife, and Chen's compass. The mathematics had finally turned against her. But then, a sound that made her heart leap impossibly, helicopter rotors, growing louder instead of fading. She turned and saw the second Black Hawk banking back toward the valley, descending toward a flat area 200 meters from her position. Reed's voice burst through her dropped radio. "Huntress, we're coming for you. Get to that clearing, move." The crazy Americans had turned back, had risked everything, violated every tactical principle, ignored the mathematics of acceptable losses, because they'd meant what they said. Rangers don't leave Rangers behind. Amina grabbed her empty rifle and ran. Amina ran like she'd never run before, her boots pounding against rock, her wounded shoulder screaming with every jarring step. Behind her, Taliban fighters opened fire, bullets cracking past her head and striking the ground at her feet. 200 meters to the clearing. 200 meters between death and impossible rescue. She didn't think about the pain, the exhaustion, the mathematical improbability of survival. She just ran, clutching Chen's compass in one hand and her empty rifle in the other, every breath burning in her lungs. The Black Hawk was descending fast, too fast, really, the kind of aggressive landing that spoke of pilots willing to risk their own lives for someone on the ground. Door gunners opened up with mounted M240s, their tracer rounds cutting crimson arcs through the gathering dusk, forcing Taliban fighters to dive for cover. 150 meters. A bullet tore through her pant leg, missing flesh by centimeters. Another struck her pack, spinning her partially around. She stumbled, caught herself, kept running. Reed's voice over loudspeakers, cutting through the gunfire. "Come on, Amina, move, we've got you." 100 meters. She could see faces now in the helicopter's door. Chen leaning out despite the incoming fire, Morrison with his medical kit ready, Thompson providing covering fire with his M4. The helicopter was hovering 3 feet off the ground, rotors kicking up dust storms, unable to fully land on the uneven terrain. 50 meters. A Taliban fighter appeared on her right, rifle raised. She didn't break stride, just drew her sidearm with her left hand and fired twice without aiming, trusting muscle memory and desperation. The fighter went down and she kept running. 20 meters. The helicopter's crew chief was screaming at her, arm extended, ready to pull her aboard. Chen had actually jumped out of the helicopter. The absolute madman had jumped out onto the ground, running toward her to close the final distance. "Chen, no," she shouted, but he ignored her, his face set in determination that matched her own. They met at 10 meters from the helicopter, his hand gripping her good arm, practically dragging her the final distance. Taliban fighters were converging, realizing their prize was escaping. A RPG whooshed past the helicopter, missing by meters and exploding against the mountainside. The pilot's voice crackled urgently. "We need to go now. 30 seconds or we're taking an RPG." Chen and Amina reached the helicopter door. Hands grabbed them, Morrison, Thompson, Reed himself, hauling them bodily into the aircraft. Amina felt the deck plates beneath her, felt the helicopter surging upward even before the crew chief could secure the door, felt the stomach-dropping sensation of rapid ascent under fire. She'd made it. Against every odd, every calculation, every expectation, she'd made it. Chen was beside her on the deck, breathing hard, his face split with a wild grin. "You promised to return my compass," he shouted over the rotor noise. Amina looked down at the compass still clutched in her bloody hand, then at Chen, then at the rangers surrounding her, these Americans who'd risked everything to come back for someone they barely knew. Something broke inside her, some final wall that had been holding back 6 months of grief and trauma and loneliness. She started crying, not quiet tears but deep, racking sobs that shook her entire body. Morrison immediately moved to check her injuries, but Reed waved him back, understanding that this was a different kind of wound, the kind that needed to bleed before it could heal. Chen wrapped his arm around her shoulders, careful of her injury, letting her sob against his tactical vest. "You're okay," he kept saying. "You're safe now. We've got you." The helicopter climbed higher, leaving the valley and its violence behind. Through the open door, Amina could see the Hindu Kush mountains stretching endlessly, the peaks that had been her home, her prison, her battlefield for so long. They looked different from up here, smaller, less all-consuming. "I killed them," she choked out between sobs, the words pouring out in a torrent she couldn't control. "I killed so many, 69 men. I remember every face, every shot. I thought it would make the pain stop, thought if I killed enough of them it would balance what they took from me. But it never stopped hurting. It never." "Shhh," Chen said gently. "I know, but that's over now. That part of your life is over." Reed crouched beside them, his weathered face compassionate. "Amina, look at me." She raised her tear-streaked face. "You saved 9 lives today. Captain Vance, my 7 Rangers, yourself. 9 people are alive right now because of what you did. Not because you killed Taliban, but because you chose to help us. That's what matters. That's what you should remember." "I don't know how to be anything else," she whispered, the words she'd said before but with different meaning now. Not resignation but desperate hope. "I don't know how to stop being a weapon and start being a person again." Morrison had moved in with his medical kit, working on her shoulder with practiced efficiency. "You don't have to figure it out right now," he said, echoing Captain Vance's earlier words. "Right now you just need to let us help you. The rest comes later." The helicopter was approaching the American base, lights visible in the distance. Amina felt panic rising. What happened now? She was an Afghan civilian who'd been operating illegally, killing people without official sanction. Would they arrest her, interrogate her, send her to a refugee camp? Reed seemed to read her thoughts. "We've already made arrangements," he said. "Command wants to debrief you, yes, but after that." He glanced at his Rangers, who all nodded. "We've put in paperwork to sponsor your immigration to the United States. Special visa for Afghans who provided critical assistance to U.S. forces. It's usually for interpreters, but Captain Vance is putting her weight behind it, and what you did today definitely qualifies as critical assistance." "America," Amina repeated, the word foreign and impossible. "But I have nothing. No education, no skills except killing. What would I do in America?" "Whatever you want," Chen said simply. "Go to school. Learn a trade, become a teacher like your mother, or," he exchanged glances with Reed, "if you want, there are programs, training programs for people with your specialized skills. Contract work with ranger teams, intelligence gathering, strategic consultation. Legal, official with support and resources." "You mean become a soldier, officially?" "I mean," Reed said carefully, "become whatever you choose to become. Soldier, student, teacher, anything. For the first time in 6 months, you get to choose your own future instead of having it dictated by survival and revenge." The helicopter was descending now, approaching the landing pad. Amina could see medics waiting with stretchers, officers with tablets ready for debriefings, the organized chaos of a forward operating base at night. "I'm scared," she admitted quietly. "I don't know how to live without fighting, without hunting, without purpose." "Then we'll help you figure it out," Morrison said, finishing with her shoulder. Same way we'd help any ranger transitioning from combat. Therapy, support time. You don't have to do it alone anymore. The helicopter touched down. The crew chief slid the door fully open and medics rushed forward. But before they could reach her, Amina pressed Chen's compass back into his hand. I kept my promise, she said, her voice steadier now. I brought it back. Chen closed his fingers around the compass, then immediately handed it back to her. Keep it. You need it more than I do right now. Let it remind you that you've got people who care whether you make it home. And Amina, he waited until she met his eyes. You are making it home. Maybe not to the home you lost, but to a new one. We're going to make sure of that. As the medics helped her out of the helicopter, supporting her weight, Amina looked back at the rangers who'd saved her. These men who'd violated tactical doctrine and risked their lives because they'd decided one traumatized Afghan teenager was worth saving. Reed stood at the helicopter door and he said something that she'd carry with her forever. Welcome to the family, Ranger Nazari.
Per
We
metterla
take care of
veramente
our
in
own.
grandissime linee, che poi sono bei lavori quelli lì, no, i lavori che vengono solitamente detti lavori umili, sono veramente dei bei lavori. Però so che c'è una mancanza al momento di